start to see attendees come into the webinar. You can see over there we've got 5, 7, 9. For those of you who are just coming in, welcome. It's great to have you with us. We just had something of a technical shocker, but luckily we've got over that and we can see everybody. And it's really great to have this esteemed panel this morning to talk about considerations when relocating to emerging markets. It's a huge topic. And Anna Kavelj, Elite Woodhams Relocation. If you've been watching our series of interviews, you'll have seen Anna and Marie and Rene actually as interview participants. But Anna, it's great to see you. You're going to host this for us.
Sure.
So thank you so much again for taking the initiative to do this. Really, really is appreciated. For those of you who are coming in as attendees, just to let you know, the session is being recorded, so we will be sending you a link to that recording if you want to go back over it or you want to share it with your teams, you will be able to do that. So Anna, I will stop talking. I will monitor the Q&A. You can put a question into the chat box or into the Q&A system. You can see the little link at the bottom of the screen, and we'll look at the questions at the end of the participants' wisdom sharing. And until then, I will say goodbye and hand over to Anna. Anna.
Thanks so much, Dom, and thank you for helping us to host this. It's very, very kind of you, much appreciated. Good morning or afternoon or evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Anna Kavelj. I'm the Managing Director of Elite Woodhams Relocation based in Australia, and we have reach into 11 Pacific nations, including Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Samoa, Solomon Islands, etc. Joining me today, I have 2 more relocation service providers, Marie O'Neill, who's in the Middle East, and Rene Steggman in Africa, they'll introduce themselves a little bit later. And I'm also thrilled that we have some corporate representation today with Tamlyn Kuhn of Global Rewards Deployment for AP Moller-Maersk. I should add that we'll do our very best to keep this to an hour, but in our preparations, we realised there's actually an awful lot to talk about, and we quite like each other's company, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. So why are we talking about this today? Well, the emerging market landscape is rich and varied, offering potential for attractive growth and increased diversification. But the vast scope and complexity of doing business in such locations brings challenges and greater exposure to some inherent risks. The term emerging market economy was coined by the World Bank in 1981 to represent companies with some but not all of the characteristics of a developed market. So that might be increased fiscal transparency, regulatory bodies, and acceptance of outside investment. So some examples of that would be Saudi Arabia and South Africa. But today our session also includes some countries such as the Solomon Islands and Senegal, which are on the UN's list of least developed countries of the world. So we're not limiting this session to the technical term emerging markets. It's more just to give a broader construct of the kind of country that we want to cover. There's no doubt there's so much to be gained for all parties when organizations invest in new markets, from the business itself, the employees that go there, the relocation consultants and other service providers in country who benefit from it, and also the wider communities. However, experience, research, and a proactive approach are really critical to success. But with on-the-ground resources, deep experience and active engagement is possible to get the best outcomes, which is really exciting. So I'm thrilled to be moderating today, and I have some excellent panelists. So without further ado, I'll let you introduce themselves. Marie, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Dom, as well, and hello to everybody. My name is Marie O'Neill. I'm the General Manager of EuRA Executive Expatriate Relocations. I'm based in our head office here in Dubai in the UAE, and we offer services across the Middle East in the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, and Iran. And I look forward to participating in the panel today. Thank you, Anna.
Rene.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. So I'm Rene Steggman. I am the Director of Relocation Africa and MyResidence.Africa, based here in our head office in Cape Town, South Africa. We cover many of these emerging markets in Africa, and they differ from year to year in line with adjusted government policy and investment landscapes. So in the 27 years we've been operating in Africa, the emerging trends adjust, and therefore the locations we serve as the Relocation Africa Group adjusts accordingly. So we are covering not all 54, but about 38 of them, but predominantly probably 8 in one particular year. That seems busier than most.
And Tam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Tammy Kuhn. I have Rene to thank for introducing me to this wonderful panel of ladies and gents. I'm also in Cape Town in South Africa. I work for Maersk, which is a massive transportation and logistics company. And for some time we've had a very good presence in emerging markets, of course, because we want to be in all the ports with our ocean transportation, and also inland now in countries to run logistics. So I've been working in this space predominantly in Middle East Africa for 10 to 15 years, moving employees around emerging markets. So it's great to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tammy. So I'll stick with you if you don't mind. And first we'll kick off with the research that is required of corporates to be able to make informed decisions before entering an emerging market. We really cannot underestimate that. So could you give us some insight into the preparation that's needed?
Yeah, so certainly preparation is key. And from a corporate perspective, emerging markets present tremendous opportunity, to grow our business, to grow our bottom line, but they come with significant risk, and it's not always successful. So not a decision we take lightly. For me, in my experience, I see 3 core areas of preparation which would be key. The first is around establishing eyes and ears on the ground in country on our behalf. So it's around local networks and trusted partnerships, both in the business context, so commercially connecting with authorities, with potential customers and the likes, and getting a sense of the reality on the ground. But also in the context now, talking about relocating employees, working through partnerships with DSPs, RMCs, like many of you on the call. And I can't stress how important that word trusted partnership is, because we really, without having representation on the ground, that is so key to our success. So that's the first area. And the second area is around really robust talent management, because we believe at Maersk that for us to succeed, we really have to have the right people on board. And yes, we're a shipping company, we're a transportation and logistics company, but we need the right people in the job. And first choice would be to have local representation and local country nationals working for us in a new emerging market, but it's not always possible. And in most cases, we lean on an assignment format where we take an existing Maersk employee who's a talent and who's put their hand up and indicated that they are mobile to relocate into an emerging market. And again, moving into an emerging market is not for everyone. And it's also, an employee can say they are mobile and they are willing to relocate, but that whole status of mobility can change significantly depending on personal circumstances, depending on the country or the market in hand. So we have to be very careful around who we match to certain countries. We need to consider their family planning. Are they intending on having children? Are they married? Do they have a partner? Also to their own individual profile. So is this the type of person that is going to succeed in an emerging market? It's not easy. You have to be comfortable with the fact that you are going likely to a country where there is extreme poverty. You are coming from a place of privilege, probably from a Western country or more developed nation, not always. And you need to be comfortable operating in that environment, and you've got to be quite careful around your approach to ensure that you succeed and that you thrive. Then my last point, apart from the rigorous talent management and making sure we get the right people on the ground, is around prioritizing the little things, because we want that talent, the people that we are deploying into those countries, to succeed. We don't want them to be distracted with immigration delays, with container delays, without having a house to live in, with an unhappy wife because the schools have not come through for their children. So we tend to say, first of all, priority, focus on getting yourself and your personal life in order so that you can arrive and settle in easily. And for us, that's a huge investment. So if things work smoothly, that's fantastic, because then the employee can then focus on the job at hand. So for me, those are the 3 core areas. Any thoughts from the panel?
Rene, did you want to add anything to Tammy's comments there?
I mean, I think, Tam's said, so much, and there's so many things to pick up on, but, and if there was a way to sort of refine that collaboration, between procurement, HR, and, the service provider to deliver these services, I think that would also be key in the emerging markets. And I think we sort of speak about various, obviously, services that are required to be delivered, but things like understanding, things like the immigration timeline, for example, could be something that could really be helpful for the client to know in terms of the planning process of getting those individuals in country. One of the big things for us in Africa is from a rental perspective, there are rentals that are required up front, so possibly up till a year up front in some locations. And, if this is not known about for a corporate or the RMC that you're dealing with, and suddenly you've got someone arriving, it does tend to throw sort of the cat amongst the pigeons as such. But everyone starts panicking almost because it isn't accounted for or budgeted, or there's things like withholding tax. So all of these sort of slight nuances are really important to understand, and I would say a bigger sense of collaboration is needed between procurement and HR and the service partner in terms of making sure those are clear for any project going into an emerging market particularly.
And Marie, was there anything you wanted to add?
I suppose, to lead on from Tam and from Rene, in regards to collaboration and timelines and everything, communication is key, and, it's always key, but in emerging markets, things are usually very different. So it is key that, we're on top of communication all the time. And as Tammy said as well, in regards to research, I think we can't underestimate the amount of research that needs to be done, and also working with the right people and the right partners. And also, on Tammy's point, definitely, it's not for every assignee moving to an emerging market. So I think the key from a corporate's perspective is that it's the right assignee is chosen, because it doesn't matter what a service provider does, it's not going to be successful unless it's the right assignee. But that's a difficult one, of course, and trying to find that suitable person. But, that is definitely a priority. And I would say as well, I was delighted to see Tammy say, invest in that support when they are moving. And yes, definitely it's vital, the more support they get from service providers, because, it is difficult, and you want it to be as smooth as possible when they're relocating to an emerging market. When things are difficult, I think it's not the time for corporates to scrimp and save, and definitely lump sums don't work. It needs to be a comprehensive offering to the assignees.
Yeah, and I think I would just add as well, in terms of the preparation, the importance of it, investing in getting the buy-in of the local stakeholders in country, because you can have the best policy coming out of ANZ headquarters or an APAC headquarters, and you've got fabulous things, and then it gets rolled out. You've got your supply chain all sorted, and then the local office takes it from under your feet because somebody wants to impress the new arrival and do their very best because they mean well and they really, really want to. But we absolutely don't want to go treading on toes in that respect, and we don't want to make an enemy out of this newly arrived expat who needs to forge some pretty good relationships. Rene, could I come to you for some insights on the pitfalls that we need to be aware of when managing to these kind of countries.
I feel like our conversation continues from what Tam has said, actually. You know, and so there are a lot of, I would say, generic considerations, and we all on this call are from the mobility industry. But for us, you know, the devil is in the detail. And, you know, in Africa, the more you start digging or uncovering, the more you find out. And so again, we go back to sort of that discussion of that collaborative approach. We often dealing through an RMC, you know, the client is dealing with RMC, and the RMC is obviously, you know, talking to us in terms of what is delivery, you know, what needs to be delivered. But there are so many layers sometimes that often there's a lost in translation. And again, I come back to collaboration at the client level. So it's not that the layers are a problem, it's more that the sort of seeking to understand the needs and get complete clarity on that is very important. And I would say the closer we are to the assignee in understanding their needs, the better the service will be delivered. So I do think that's pretty generic, but I do think that is something that's really important as well. So if we talk about some fun aspects, because there's obviously a myriad of pitfalls, traffic. Okay, so all of us deal with, you know, the odd commute into town or into the office, you know, for an hour or so. But when we talk traffic in Africa, and not in every city, obviously this is again another generalization, but the infrastructure and roads are not often as a developed country. And so, you know, we can sit in traffic for many, many hours. So how this relates to the mobility sector is when we're asked to do a one-day home search, for example, in Angola, without laughing, it's actually an impossible task, because you could possibly get to see 2 houses, but to give a destination service provider in a location a one-day home program, we've actually taken it off our menu of offerings. So if anyone's asked us before, we often go back and say we don't deliver a one-day home search program, but we'll deliver a 2-day. We are then able to achieve a little bit more. So traffic is a real big problem. Some countries, for example, the assignee will get a 4x4, and some assignees will go, well, why do I need a 4x4? You know, I can just have a sedan. Some roads are that bad that your car won't make it to the office. So, you know, the infrastructure, obviously we're talking emerging markets again. So emerging markets, you know, infrastructure is not, you know, solidified. There's budgets still being approved for road development, or maybe it's been, you know, corrupt money that's not quite come out yet, or whatever it is. But, you know, driving in Africa is a challenge. And further to that, and it's people laugh about it, but it is actually a real thing, is that you could be driving along and literally a car walk in front of you on a highway, or you know, you run over a buck or something, you know, in some of these African locations. So the reality is that, you know, Africa is pretty wild to drive in, and you have to have your wherewithal. And even in a sort of more modern society like South Africa, you know, just to say that traffic lights are more as a guideline. It's not actually red is a stop. I know in Australia it's very different, but certainly in Africa, I mean, I laugh, even in South Africa, it's just people don't take sort of, everything's a guideline. There's no real rules. So if we go on to something a little bit more lighter, slightly cultural, I guess, African time. If any of you watched The Lion King, the saying Hakuna Matata, which actually means no worries, but actually sometimes taken into sort of the context of, you know, tomorrow's another day, we'll sort it out tomorrow. So there is a sort of sense in Africa, you need to sort of, if you're coming from what I say, a big shining city to Africa, we are half-paced. Now, we obviously is a generalization because we have Western businesses and multinationals that operate in a fairly normal way. But generally speaking, Africa time is a real thing. And, you know, the expectation, I guess this goes back to that expectation management, is expecting a telephone to be installed in a day, or expecting to open up a bank account on an app or anything like that. You know, you go to the bank, you stand in queues, you wait, you know, immense amount of time. So time, again, when you sort of authorizing a program for an emerging market, you know, especially when people start taking, well, we need to start looking at virtual service deliveries, or we need to cut down costs. You know, it's all around down to time. You know, if it takes us 6 hours to go and get a driver's license, you know, if you want us to hold their hand, it's going to take 6 hours. So I think, you know, we obviously do encourage cultural training programs. Relocation Africa developed the Power of Difference program, which really is not taking, you know, saying that they're different to us necessarily. It's more around understanding the differences, so that they, when they come into a different country, that they use their adaptation and integration skills to get along and work according to the society that they're living in. So I think that's a very important in terms of cultural adaptation into a location. And then just jumping onto compliance, and I know there's a lot here, but you know, compliance is very important, obviously, and we comply as a DSP. We have the EuRA quality seal, for example, but from a compliance perspective, in South Africa, we have something called the POPIA Act, which is getting closer to aligning with GDPR. However, just to give you a little stat here, there are 17 countries in Africa that have enacted a comprehensive personal data protection legislation. Namely, I'm going to just name them out of interest: Angola, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Gabon, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Lesotho, Madagascar, Mali, Mauritius, Morocco, Senegal, Seychelles, South Africa, Tunisia, and Western Sahara are the only countries out of 54 that have a comprehensive data protection act. So often a client says to us, you know, we need to send someone into Ethiopia. So we sit now having to straddle compliance and agreements with our clients, you know, in sort of Western society, and we need to send over information on their assignee into a country that does not have data protection. So it's really important, one, for our clients to understand that, and you know, be aware of that, because yes, we are signing contracts with them, and we will obviously advise them if sending people into, for example, Mozambique, that there is no data protection there, that we need to take more care. Can we send this information over? So there are many, many more, and I'd love to hear comments from the other panelists, you know, on their views and their countries as well.
Marie, is there anything specific for the Middle East?
I was laughing to myself when Rene was talking about traffic. I remember the first time I went to Tehran in Iran, and I actually thought I was in an amusement park in the bumper cars, because it was literally just drive where there's space, and cars were just rubbing off each other. And I thought, my God, this is crazy. And, you know, it's a city where I think it's 18 million per day, or 14 million by night. So again, traffic is crazy in Tehran, and you know, a home search in one day is just not possible. It's a minimum of 2 days. And also in regards to time, you know, I suppose of course you've got African time, but in the Middle East, we have a famous word called inshallah, means with the will of God. So, you know, you'll get your tenancy contract tomorrow, inshallah, which means it could be tomorrow, it could be next week. So, you know, it is quite difficult to manage expectations. And, you know, what I say to any assignee I meet is, when you arrive in this part of the world, just have buckets of patience. Otherwise you won't survive. And then I think on the whole compliance, you know, it's a difficult one when you're working in emerging markets, and you know, things take longer and timelines are longer because we do things the right way and we don't entertain anti-bribery or corruption, you know, but our timelines then are longer because of that. And sometimes that's difficult when working with assignees and corporates, because someone in the local office might say, oh no, I can do that in 1 day. But okay, how can you do it in 1 day? You know, it's questionable. So it may take us 2 or 3 days because we're doing it in the correct manner. So, you know, they are just a few things. But when it comes to pitfalls or challenges and obstacles in emerging markets, you know, I'm sure all of us on the call today will know there's several examples and areas. And yeah, so we could probably talk for the whole hour on that alone. So I won't go on too much on it.
We could. Tammy, was there anything you wanted to add to pitfalls?
I think just adding on Marie's notes, Also, to appreciate that most emerging markets have some kind of foreign national or multinational presence. So we're no longer really talking cowboy country, so that there is a compliance, there is a process, there is regulation. So in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, at least within Africa, you could get things done with your suitcase of money and you could, plow through and do it your way. But, that's not the case today. There are local authorities. Yes, it's an emerging market. It's not quite at West standards, but there is a process and a protocol to follow. So we have to be patient.
Yeah. And I was going to add, for the Pacific, you guys have your versions. We have bullet time. So everything's on bullet time, which, you can wait 12 months to get your rental deposit back. No probs. And I think what's maybe a little unique about, well, maybe not, but the Pacific is so, the most pressing issue there would be climate. And environmental issues. That's some of the most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change and natural disasters, whether that's cyclones or typhoons or volcanoes, and when those things occur, there was one this year in April, Cyclone Harold, that hit a number of Pacific nations, and it's causing landslides, it takes out power. So these are real. Companies may not be able to get hold of their people, and can the business continue, and what are they going to do? And then they have to rebuild, and then water shortages might be an issue. So this is a real thing that has to be considered in the Pacific nations. All right, so Marie, back to you, please. I don't want it to be very all negative pitfalls. So what are some of the positives that can come out of relocating to an emerging market?
Are there any? Just kidding. I suppose it's a difficult one after, all the pitfalls and, being realistic about it, there are a lot of challenges and obstacles. And I think it's a matter of turning those challenges and obstacles into positives, and having the right attitude and the right assignee. And something I mentioned on earlier as well, that corporates don't scrimp and save, that, they give the correct support to assignees. I think that's vital in order to turn it into a positive experience. And, definitely cultural training, because usually in emerging markets, it is a completely different culture, and not just for the assignee, for the entire family, in order to make it that they hit the ground running and are culturally sensitive. I think that's very important. And, overall, for an assignee, it's an amazing experience for the right assignee. It's a very rich assignee experience. Of course, it's not for everyone, but if it is the right assignee, it can be extremely successful. And from an assignee's perspective, they can see rapid career growth. It's usually a huge learning curve. They gain a lot of knowledge and experience. And usually these roles are quite broader than they would be in their home country. And they get a lot more, I suppose, independence and autonomy, and are exposed to business leaders that would come visiting these locations. So in regards to their career growth and potential, I think there's huge potential there. It's definitely a good test of ability for assignees. They get to develop local policies and procedures, and then influence up and down the organization, which is a great opportunity. And they get to develop, I suppose, a different perspective on life, and the opportunity to learn a new language, get immersed in a completely new culture. Most of these emerging markets is a new culture to assignees. Amazing people they will meet, fantastic food, places they will visit, and I suppose there are fewer expats usually in these locations, which means that, the bond and the friendship with these expats they make will probably last for life. And the fact that there are fewer expats, they will make friends with locals, which is an amazing opportunity, an amazing experience. And again, friendships for life. Unfortunately, here in Dubai, we're 80% expats, so we don't get that opportunity. I've one Emirati local friend, I'm here 13 years. So, but in countries like Iran, where there's fewer expats, then there's more opportunity for that. I suppose as well, for assignees that move to emerging markets, there's more appreciation for home, and maybe they took things for granted, which, now it's an eye-opener, and to realize that things actually are difficult. And Definitely they are pleasant surprises. And I suppose I'll give you one example. When I started visiting Iran first, I was very surprised. So I went into meetings to meet with, senior HR managers, HR directors, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that most of these people were women. So, my perspective before I went to Iran, from the media, the global media, that, it was a male-dominated society, but women are very well educated, have high positions, and I'll probably say that I've had the toughest and most grueling meetings from these HR people. So, it was a really pleasant surprise, and I think for assignees that just have the right attitude and that are open and positive, they can have an amazing experience in these emerging countries.
Tam, did you want to add anything?
Well, certainly we see a number of assignees finding love and settling down and never wanting to leave, both in their hearts and, with their family, and finding marriage, but also settling down and not wanting to leave. So that's definitely proof in itself. There's upside for sure.
Just actually on that, Tam, when I think it was my first or second trip to Tehran, and I had a meeting with an embassy there, and a gentleman told me that the diplomats and assignees coming there, they all arrived crying, didn't want to be there, didn't want to come, but they all left crying as well, but for a different they didn't want to leave. They had such an amazing experience. So it just goes to show that something that might appear quite negative at the beginning sometimes is the best opportunity for somebody, and they can really make the most of it.
And I can also support your comment around a test of talent. So it's almost a litmus test for us, so we have a talent who's put their hand up and is eager and keen, and for them to go on this adventure and make a success of it is such a building block and a stepping stone, to climbing the ranks. So something that we certainly do.
Rene, anything to add on the positives?
Yeah, well, we often say to our assignees, you've got to embrace the unknown. Sometimes deep, dark Africa, there's a lot of unknowns. But I think, one of our training ladies, she often says, I can train certain things, but attitude I can't train. So it is such an important aspect, to kind of have an assignee with the right attitude. Obviously, we can't prescribe that that's what we want in emerging markets, but it is important. And I would just say that, there are so many opportunities, you leaving sort of a home base, maybe comfort, coming to a place where it's emerging, and your little impact that you could make if your spouse is unable to get a work permit, which is the case in South Africa at the moment. Could volunteer, get involved in the community, really find some other projects or involvement that you probably wouldn't normally do back home, because those are the experiences I feel they talk about, for a long time. So if I talk to expats who've been here and now gone back home, they say it's one of the best locations, and they've been to many around the world that they've been to, because of the ability of them to actually sink into the communities and get involved. Also, Africa is I guess because of the nature of not having big corporates, let's say, is there's a very big entrepreneurial spirit. So, we've also had expats come in and start little, business ideas or what have you, because they've come from a Western culture where certain things work, and it's frustrating maybe because it doesn't work here, and found business opportunity through that. So there's a lot of positives. There are a lot of positives.
And I think I would add, just to highlight as well, the opportunities that are given in from a sustainable point of view of giving back to the community, or aiding the communities that we're investing into. Like it's very well regarded to be welcoming these people into their countries, into their towns, and it's a huge opportunity. If I think of our relocation consultants, they're absolutely thrilled, and it's an opportunity for them and also the community. So if a company decides, instead of having 20 FIFO, fly in, fly out people in and out, if they actually relocated 20 people with their families who get settled and experience the culture, they're then shopping in the supermarkets, their kids might be going to the school and all of that. And so the whole community benefits from what might be seen as a rather siloed experience for the assignee or the corporate. And it's not, nowadays as well, it's not just about corporates getting the bottom line out of this. It's all about what we can give back and helping the markets that we're in.
And just to add to that, Anna, because I mean, I know one of the discussions, globally is around sort of business traveler and short-term assignees becoming a bit more of the flavor. There's a very strong chance that, they won't get submerged into the culture, won't ever truly understand the culture if that is the strategy. And I think there is a place for both, and certainly a strategy for both. But, it is important that, to submerge yourself, you really need to be in that location for a longer time. So unless you're doing very high touch, quick technical in and out, obviously that's will provide a solution for the business. But in terms of a submersion in the culture, to really understand and work with the people, either transferring your skills or technical knowledge, or the culture of the head office, let's say from a Danish base, it's important to spend the time and submerge yourself culturally into the business to be able to understand, and then obviously the business benefits from that.
And I think it's probably true to say that across all of these huge, vast areas that we're covering today, building relationships and taking the time to build those relationships is absolutely key. So if you think that you can parachute in, quick fix and get out, you're not going to get the long-term solutions if you haven't bothered to make the relationships with the people on the ground. All right, Tam, if I could come to you. So one of the points that's quite clear is around managing expectations. So that's managing the corporate's expectations. If there's a relocation management company involved, managing their expectations for the people on the ground, the destination service providers, and the assignees. That's a lot of people to manage. So can you give some examples of how you do this and what your experience is?
Yeah, so for sure. So I think also we've got to be so careful here because expectations do differ, and you have the Ferrari level or style assignment where you can dictate how long your swimming pool is and how many domestic staff you get, and then you get the Toyota. And certainly for us, we've been doing assignments for many years, for example in Africa, and we did 30 years ago start with quite a Ferrari style approach, and as things have become more competitive and more multinationals have established presence and we've changed our assignment practices over time, we do have a tiered approach. And so for certain countries we would tailor our offering differently. And so if you're moving an employee into DRC, which is a high risk security location, we're not going to argue about the nitty-gritty on a housing allowance. We're rather going to offer a benefit in kind and make sure that that employee and their family are well cared for and they are safe. So this gets me to the theme of duty of care. So from a corporate perspective, managing expectations is with the assignee, firstly, is saying, we will prioritize everything that looks after you and your family from a care perspective. So we have certain things that we identify as priority, that being safety and security, schooling for your children, housing, your well-being, okay, medical provision. So depending what the local medical facilities are like, we need to have Medivac in place if necessary. The priority for us is not your R&R holidays off to Dubai or wherever. It's not the swimming pool, it's not the domestic staff. And I think, to make that very clear from the beginning, we also need to be very clear with the individual and say, we will do as much as we can to protect and care for you, but there are risks associated with going to these countries that we cannot necessarily give you the foolproof cover. So in the event of all eventualities, you are protected, because there are times where you will need to buckle down like local employees do and local nationals do in that country and just grit it and bear it. There's some things we can't protect you from. And to be clear, so we don't really have the conversations about golf membership anymore and the country clubs. It's more about prioritizing what's really important. So duty of care is really key. And I think coming back to that tiered, is this the Ferrari or the Toyota? That also links then to the providers and the suppliers that we partner with, because it can be so confusing and muddling if midway through an assignment we start arguing about, well, was this assignment meant to have assistance on the ground with finding housing or not? And so to be fair to all parties, that communication piece is key. And I can imagine sitting from your side, your side of the table as relocation providers or the likes, you need to know also the exact detail of what this assignment entails and to what extent the corporate is sponsoring the care and the different elements. Yeah, and I think expectations, linking back to the pitfalls. So, we've got to be very clear there are stumbling blocks that arise time and time again around immigration. So in the Western world, you apply for your work permit and it happens per procedure, and there's a standard delivery date and it happens seamlessly. And I would say, at least in Africa, the guarantee is that it will not happen per the date given. So the likelihood of it ever following the days given is very high. There's always an exception, and it's going to happen. So to anticipate delays, to get that awareness in place. Other things that I really like to make clear in expectation management with the assignee is that you mentioned it on pitfalls, traffic is bad. So proximity to get to Western nations or to get back to your home country can be super challenging. So we do not have international airports operating across Africa as hubs to get you, in one flight home. It can be 4 flights to get you home, 48 hours travel, with flights delayed, flights cancelled, and airports are not as comfortable as our Dubai International, Emirates style. So you've got to be very clear with assignees that if we have a case of terrorism or if we have an outbreak of Ebola, it's not straightforward. And we do our best with our partnerships with the likes of yourselves to make a plan and to look after them and their family, but it's not plain sailing. And in South Africa, we always say, "Aboord maak 'n plan." So it's an Afrikaans way of saying you have to do the best with what you have. You have to make a plan. And mobility in Africa is very much like that. So you have to find solutions and think on your feet. Any other thoughts on expectations?
Yes,
Yeah,
Marie, do you want to add anything?
Interesting, Tammy, when you started off saying, it's not 30 years ago. I remember up until 5 or 6 years ago here in Dubai, especially for some of the oil companies, the assignees were getting hardship allowances. And now for anyone that has been to Dubai, will find that very hard to believe. It's certainly not a hardship location. We're probably one of the most spoiled people in the world, and we've got probably the most 5-star hotels per capita in the world. So, times have changed, and I think sometimes assignees, and from our experience more so maybe in the oil industry, think they are still back 20, 30 years ago, but it is a very different time now. And I suppose with your point on immigration as well, and with Iran, it's a case-by-case basis, and they're quite suspicious of expats coming into the country. So basically a committee gets together to review each case, and that can be time-consuming. So, it is very different immigration in emerging markets than it is in the rest of the world. And I suppose what I'd add on managing expectations and from our side is never assume anything. An assignee, their assumptions, what HR have told them, what the RMC have told them. Like, we've had assignees that are literally about to get on a plane and come here, a couple that are not married and have never heard that they have to be married and it's illegal to live together, or same-sex couples. So, it's something you would assume people would know. It just through experience, we've learned never assume anything, that everything has to be spelled out, and, not even once, probably twice or 3 times to people. We had another case of an assignee go into the immigration department to do a formality, and, was dressed quite revealing, let's say, even though we had in bold and capital letters in the email said, you know, you need to have long sleeves, a skirt below your knees. You just don't assume, you know, people really, you have to say it over and over. And in emerging markets, you know, culturally and religion, everything, it is quite different. So I think, you know, never underestimate what you need to communicate to assignees and to try and manage their expectations.
Renee?
Well, just a story maybe. So one of our assignees coming in, they relocated in and they were made comfortable in their home. Their moving goods arrived, unpacked the whole house. We were all done with our job, and you know, the happy days. Off they went for dinner one evening. Anyway, came back, and the next morning we get this phone call. This family is out of here. They are leaving the country. There's no way they're staying, because they found a snake in their garden. And when it comes to sort of managing expectations, you know, and yeah, sure, this maybe not just emerging markets, but there are certain nuances that, you know, need to be considered in all locations, but emerging markets obviously particularly. And I guess, you know, managing those expectations, and I'm almost was thinking while everyone was talking, it's almost like corporates should almost have an emerging market package, which is slightly different to a developed country package, you know, because there are considerations that need to be carefully considered, or there are, you know, allowances perhaps that need to be different. And that kind of brings me to this regional, you know, discussion that I've had, I know, with various people, but, you know, from a regional perspective, it makes sense when you're sending someone, you know, like for a corporate to go on a global contract and say, right, I've got, you know, RMC looking after me globally. It would be naive for that corporate to think that that is a solution in a box. They need to understand those regions are all very, very different and have such intricate nuances that need to be considered. So almost should be more understanding of regional differences from a global perspective. So, you know, it has to all kind of be sort of closer collaborated. I mean, that word collaboration, I think, is overused in our conversation today, but it certainly is so important to, you know, have these discussions from very much a country, location, or even market specific for corporate moving into a location.
And I think I would add on that, when we're dealing with global companies, and we're managing all of our Pacific operations out of Australia, we take what we do very seriously. We have all the right compliance things in place. We're very happy to meet KPIs, but we actually rely on the people that are on the ground in those countries to tell us, is that possible? And we often have to go back and say, these KPIs, we simply cannot meet them. So if you're not able to be flexible, we're going to be failing from the get-go, because I cannot get you 6 properties to see in one day. I cannot get your itinerary to you 3 days prior, because chances are the internet went down, the person didn't manage to get hold of them. I probably can't even get hold of them, let alone get you an itinerary. So that's one thing I think, is just managing expectations backwards as well of what is achievable. And the other thing I would say is that in our region, we have some of the most beautiful tropical islands on the planet. But I think that sometimes we have to manage expectations of what goes in to make those resorts so fabulous. Like what the fresh fruit platters and all of that sort of stuff, actually living in these islands is very, very different. And you may find there's no fresh fruit in the supermarket. How do you square that off with what the Sheraton has to offer here in their buffet breakfast? You know, so it's very different. A holiday and a relocation are two very different things. The beaches are still beautiful. All right. Okay, I'll go to Rene now. So we'll move on and talk about the investment required of destination service providers to ensure that consistent quality service, which I just alluded to there, is expected of your consultants, but normally pretty low volume by any standards, very low by some countries. So that you would think would result in higher fees. So low volume, high complexity. How do you manage that?
Oh, Anna. So in 27 years, you know, operating on the continent of Africa, I mean, initially we were based only in South Africa, and our client demanded that we service other locations. And so we did set up offices, bricks and mortar, in Kenya and Nigeria. And some of the most expensive lessons I've learned were, basically that time. And learning that, and then this was probably 15, 16 plus years ago, that the volumes could never cover the costs of those locations. So we did close those down. We only have one bricks and mortar office now, but we do cover 38 locations from a destination services perspective or relocation perspective, from an immigration perspective 21, and from a temporary accommodation perspective 28. Now, we realized that we needed to service our clients, but yet we couldn't have bricks and mortar. And I remember sort of also 15 years ago, there was a requirement by RMCs that in order to become part of their network, you needed to have bricks and mortar. So it was a very tough sort of trying to convince these companies that, we are established in those locations with excellent service delivery. So we have in any one of our locations, we have also diversified, obviously geographically, and diversified from a service perspective. So we have just to give you Lagos, Nigeria, we have 2 immigration outsourced partners. We have 3 research consultants of our own, and we have 5 destination services consultants. So we have a network of consultants in every single one of our locations we operate in to offer the services that we need to deliver for our clients. From an immigration perspective, we did start off training our consultants because we wanted them to be our own network. We have now moved over the last 5 years to an outsourced immigration model. So we partner with local immigration partners because it is more important that they keep up to date from a legislative perspective, that we've got people who take business basically from an immigration perspective seriously. From a DSP perspective, we have an intense, I would say, 13, 14 module training program, which includes video content, written content, as well as tutorials and quizzes on every single module. And before that, actually, so we comply each of our consultants, so then we adhere to certain insurances, et cetera, that from a, again, contractual perspective, we need to adhere to. So every one of our consultants, prior to them being onboarded, are taken through a compliance section and then onto the training module, which is, as I say, 14 odd modules. These modules change because a new requirement comes in, like GDPR, which is not so new now, but when it did come in. So we had to then roll out this training continent-wide to all of our consultants to make sure they understood what the requirement is, for our clients and for our business to operate. So it is, and we continue to invest heavily, and the low volume, is not exactly being very fruitful now, but we believe in time that it will be. So we provide services for one of our clients. We actually only provided services for them in all the difficult locations. And one day I phoned them and said, listen, we really need to start, feeling some benefit here. Please, could we get some of your, South African work? We consider that the easy work, But yeah, so it is certainly difficult. We did add, a lot of clients would ask us, for example, I'm trying to find an example in my head quickly, but so Casablanca is our main location in Morocco, but often we get asked for delivering services in Rabat or other locations in Morocco. So what we would do is we'd say, look, that is considered an out of main location delivery of service, and we have a couple of options. It takes us 4 to 6 weeks to train a consultant in that location, and we would do that if the client has got more than 2 assignees going in. Otherwise, it's still an out of main location fee, which is charged to the client, and we would get our then main city consultants. They would cover the transport and accommodation costs, and that experienced consultant will then deliver services. but it very much is client dependent, and we do try and, as much as possible, share those costs of those one-offs with the client. In some locations, it's actually benefited us to take on the cost, because we've then been able to market that location and had other clients be attracted for that location. But it is difficult to say that we cover our costs because of the volumes are so low. We are developing more and more programs to try and ensure that we are not sort of wasting research time getting the same information to the clients. So we work with Relocation Online as a portal, and we have a lot of our information populated on there to try and save the consultant duplication of time and effort. So we do that in terms of trying to deliver more efficiently and effectively in some of our locations, and that has been really helpful. But yeah, it is expensive, and unfortunately, I think Africa, we'll never see volumes like Europe or America sees volumes, and that is something to consider. So from a pricing point perspective, when clients come to us again and say, could you drop your cost? Well, you know, it's difficult, because we are also a very much strong believer in we pay our consultants very well, and it has been our strategy that at any time I can pick up the phone to any of my consultants anywhere in Africa and say, hey, tomorrow morning, please could you be available for a client? Because not only do we pay them appropriately and well, we also pay them not in 30 days. We pay them when they finish their project. So when they finish their project and they send us their timesheet, we pay them. So when we start negotiating with clients, and I had a couple of negotiations with our clients to say, hey, listen, we really can't do anything more than 30 days for you. 30 days is what's fair to us as a business, and is fair to the consultants that you expect tomorrow morning to be available for your assignee. And so it is something that we need to manage carefully. And the reason we manage it so tightly and carefully is because we're here for a long time. A good time too, but a long time.
I'm glad you put in the good time, Rene.
Yeah.
Look, I would second everything that Rene has said, and I won't go on too long. I'm conscious of time and having time for questions and answers. You know, we have definitely in the Middle East, the volume is the UAE, particularly Dubai and then Abu Dhabi. We have bricks and mortar and office in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait and Oman, we don't have bricks and mortar. The volume is just too low for that. But we do have the EuRA quality seal. We, in our head office, we follow the same processes and procedures across the region. Our staff come to Dubai for training. They all follow the same training. In Iran, in Tehran, we have an office, a full-time staff member we have for the last 4 years there, which has been a big investment, you know, and we saw good pickup back 4 years when we 4 years ago when we set up. But then, of course, the US sanctions were put in place again, so that's halted a lot of our business there. But like Rene said, we're in for the long run and not the short run, and you know, hopefully it is a huge market to emerge, and hopefully at some stage it will, and we have our presence, we have someone there working for us, and fingers crossed the elections go the way we want them to go next month in America, but I won't bank too much on that one. But at some stage it will open up. But you know, to be compliant, do things the right way, it's not cheap, and we're not the cheapest provider in the market. We don't want to be. We want to do things the right way and offer a fair price for that, which I believe we do. So yeah, I won't go on any further, but very similar to what Rene has said.
Tam, did you want to add anything, or you're not really, don't care about this side of things so much?
No, I mean, I would say that nothing in this mobility space is cheap. And, you know, we don't take the decision lightly as to where we're going to invest and where we're going to deploy people. Once we've taken that decision, we're not actually hung up about the cost, because everything seems expensive. What we're really wanting is quality. So in my experience at Maersk, we've had a number of different providers over the years, and it's not price that's the differentiator. It's the extent to which the provider can communicate and give quality service, and that's what we're looking for.
And that is a very nice note to end on. I will not add anything else. Thank you very much. Dom, do you want to take over?
That was just fascinating. Really, really, really interesting. And you've had some great comments just coming through saying, what a fantastic session. Thank you so much to the panel. Some really interesting questions as well. I think actually it's interesting how, as the discussions moved on, you've preempted a lot of the questions that have come through. But there's a very interesting one from Tracy Couchman, which is, Tamlyn, for you, and you did allude to this earlier in the session, in deciding which talent to deploy in emerging markets, do you make the decision on those employees in-house, or do you work with supplier partners?
So we do it in-house, but we don't do it perfectly in-house, and we make mistakes along the way. We have the scale that we can do it in-house. But if I was a smaller organization, I would definitely lean on external partners to support. And something that I'll admit that we don't do enough of at Maersk is certainly on that cultural readiness and cultural awareness with candidates. Because, it actually needs to come in at the selection phase. It's not just something you do pre-arrival. So I see opportunity for more of that in time.
That leads me on to a lot of the comments and questions that have come through the chat box are around that cultural piece, and you all spoke about that really eloquently. The first question I had is from Fiona Williams at Ayres. Cultural training is obviously very important before and during an assignment to an emerging market. What is the panel's recommendation on how this should ideally be delivered? Rene.
So can you repeat that question?
Yeah,
sorry.
What's the kind of optimal way that cultural training can be delivered? And obviously with your vastly different cultural markets, I thought it was a good one for you first.
Well, actually, and it's interesting, Dom, and probably I go to some of the terminology we use in our industry, and that the corporate market may not always be sort of understanding. There are various things. So we offer a myriad of services, and it can be literally during an orientation program, we have something called the practical aspects of life. So our consultants in each of our locations are trained on, sort of a basic menu of what those topics could be, and they fill in the color. And that can be run through our orientation program. And in fact, we don't even tell sometimes the client that we're doing it, because we know it's so important to understand business and social norms, just to find your way, whether looking into someone's eye is appropriate or not, or tipping in a restaurant, etc., etc. So we run a practical aspects of life program, and then we developed something called the power of difference, which can be run through various means. But I think, Dom, and I know this is such a hot topic, but also a very under-invested from a client perspective topic. Clients often have budget for important things, immigration, maybe the household goods, temporary accommodation, and maybe, a small little program from a destination services perspective. And I think in all cases, and again, I come to that emerging market as opposed to a developed location, and obviously your cultural difference maybe even coming from an emerging market to a developed, there could be discussions around that, and I'm not saying just coming to emerging markets, but I think emerging markets are very different often to a place where you've come from, and to have something in place to be able to get some information to make that individual feel comfortable. If you ask a corporate, what is your main objective here? Your main objective is to get that individual productive in their workplace to get me ROI, bottom line. Now, they cannot be productive in their workplace if they are not culturally prepared or feeling settled and standing in a queue applying for their own telephone line. So the support that is needed has to be appropriate for the location that they're entering in. And so I know there's probably a lot of cultural trainers on the call, and we do promote using cultural preparation, and even the DSPs who offer even some form of practical aspects and I'm happy to share what we do from a practical aspect. All DSPs should be offering something, at least to assist that family integrate. I'm going to use something I've probably used before, Dom, but only 15% of a successful assignment is attributed to the technical competency of that individual. The 85% is the adaptability and the integration. So cultural training and adaptation and integration is hugely important.
That is really interesting, and it brings me on to another comment from Javier Singh Chadha in ICANN in India, who says, and I'm going to direct this to Marie and to Anna, this is about setting expectations, which you all talked about very, very eloquently, and Marie, I loved your anecdote about, you can say over and over, this is the dress code you should adopt, but it doesn't necessarily sink in. So Javier is saying, we go for over an hour on a call about setting expectations, followed by sharing a lot of reading material via email, access to our digital kit for more information. But there are still times when we get pushback from the assignee and sometimes from the RMC. Do you have any better approaches that panelists suggest would make expectation setting more effective?
Yeah, we're quite similar to that, Dom. So we have a 1 hour call as well. Usually it's 1 hour Zoom call with the assignee and the consultant, and that's going through everything, then followed up by an email outlining everything again in the email. Then they get access to our portal, which has all the documentation on the portal, when it comes to cultural awareness, everything we've spoke about in the call. So it's like, it's nearly 3 times it's hit with them. So, which I think is necessary. And, if there's anything else out there that we could do, please let me know. And again, of course, when they're face to face with the consultant, on the 1, 2, 3, 4 days out on the road, they're just emphasizing all of these things again. So I think you just have to emphasize it as much as possible. And pushback, I suppose, with assignees, when it comes to pushback, yeah, sometimes they don't want that call. They won't read the emails. They won't go on the portal. But, there's only so much you can do, really. And I think, if we've tried to push all angles, then it really is up to the assignee as well. It's the end of the day, people have to take responsibility themselves.
Absolutely. And Anna, you mentioned, the Sheraton's fantastic breakfast platters and that kind of thing. And I mean, that's huge, isn't it? You are saying, we're going to paradise.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the other thing I would say with regards to the cultural component, so 2 points. One is everybody has their own way of absorbing information. Some people like to read, some people want paper, some people have a Kindle, some people want to watch a video, some people want to listen. So to Marie's point, if you kind of provide options as to how people absorb the information you want to give, you can lead a horse to water, but you're trying your very best. The other point I would make, which is probably particularly relevant at the moment, is for these kind of locations, less so obviously for Australia now, but in those locations, orientation or pre-assignment trips would have been quite common, to go and check it out and start to get a feel for it, look at the schools, understand, so you can start to, then you go home and you prepare and you have it in your mind. During COVID times, with immigration being as hard as it is, with access to countries, with quarantine requirements, people are not flying into a country for a week's orientation trip. So really, that cultural stuff is going to have to happen online or through calls. It's going to have to happen pre-arrival. Otherwise, you can imagine what it's going to be like for these people completing quarantine, getting off an aeroplane, doing the quarantine, and then out in the big bad world. So it's quite a shock. I just thought that was quite a unique situation that we find ourselves in at the moment.
It is. I mean, that's again the level of high touch, and we've all talked about this across the industry. The needs are much higher right now. There are so many questions and comments that have come through. I don't think we're gonna have time to get to them all, but Marty, you made a very interesting point, and to Rene's point earlier about data protection and about how data is shared. And basically what Marty was saying is, although there isn't one overarching a single piece of legislation, there are all these different bits that, there's this rule here, and there's the rule of privacy here, and there's, that must be very challenging when you're trying to draw all of those strands together in all of the places you're working.
Absolutely. I mean, from our perspective, I know one of the RMC clients asked us, and we did a table, across the continent of Africa, in terms of, from a data protection perspective, because we're accountable as a business. We're accountable as a business, in terms of our insurance, in terms of the information we're sharing, and we need to make sure that the clients and the RMCs and even our DSPs that we work with are overly aware of the information that we can tell them. So often it takes a lot of extra time. And again, to Anna's point earlier about, the fact in these low volume locations and emerging markets is almost like we should actually be charging our clients for this information and research, because there is a lot of pressure on us to consistently give this information, but no one's paying us for that. So it's a huge investment. But yeah, we obviously are alerted to these sorts of things, and we need to alert our clients to these sorts of things. And Even now with the complications of COVID, which we haven't really spoken much about, getting out the information in terms of the complexity around which locations are open or closed, or which locations are accepting certain people for what purposes. It's a complex and big continent we work on. But yeah, it's just, if the clients could be just understanding of what we're dealing with, then obviously that is our main thrust. But in terms of data protection, we do try very hard to share with our clients if it's legal or not. But as I think Martin did say in the chat section, there are certain laws that would cover certain data protection. So we can't act like, as Tammy said earlier, like cowboys. And we don't. But it is more alerting clients to the fact that they are not fully protected in terms of sometimes the contracts that we are signing.
And just a final question, and so sorry to all the people who've put really fantastic comments in this chat box, which we haven't been able to get to. But Fiona Mugano asks, do you feel that companies should be working with specialist security firms, such as Investiga, in some of the areas in which you're working? Does that impact on you, Tamlyn? Can I start with you?
Yeah, no, for sure. So there are certain locations where security and safety is a huge concern, and not just because, for example, in South Africa, crime levels are high. So no matter who you are living in South Africa, you have an increased risk, and there are certain measures you have to take. But also from a perspective of, often our assignees that we are putting into emerging markets are in a position of leadership, and you are actually putting them on a pedestal and almost making them a target. And we have had cases, sadly, a number of cases where assignees have been targeted, unfortunately. And so partnering with security specialists, at Maersk, we have an in-house security department and function, but they are not experts. They certainly have to lean on specialist skills from consulting companies and security suppliers. And again, linking back to the regional theme, a global provider is fine because they have presence, but a regional or country expert knows that market best. So it's often the kind of local provider or regional provider that would be best suited. So I don't know the provider that's asked the question, but certainly in Africa we have well-known security brands or better known brands, and sometimes that's a good solution. But other times, in Africa or in emerging markets, you have to weigh up your options and take each decision separately. There's no rule of thumb.
I would just add to that on the security, so in Papua New Guinea, it's still a pretty volatile location. And so our consultants are locals, so they know the red zones, and they will tell people on the home search trip that you're not going down there. I'm showing it to you from a distance, so but we're not going to go down there. But in some cases, we're required to have back-to-base radios or even a security person with us whilst we're doing the home search. But it was really interesting what you say about, you can have a global provider, you can have a regional provider. So in Papua New Guinea, we're in 2 locations. We're in Port Moresby and we're in Lae. And I knew the security firm in Port Moresby, and I said to the consultant in Lae, oh, do they have an office in Lae? Can we use them for this upcoming assignee? And she was like, oh yeah, they're here, but they're not as good as the other guys, so I reckon we go with the other guys. And that was just a small town, but from her knowledge of who is going to know about things before they escalate and who's going to be the best provider, that's really a first-hand example of you've got to go with the local knowledge.
And that's a great note on which to end. And I mean, I'd like to say to all of you, particularly your local knowledge is phenomenal. That's why you are leaders in your fields. But, across the EuRA network, I think everybody would agree that that's why this industry exists. I mean, just as a tiny anecdote from my own life, we got moved from Washington, D.C. to Belize City in 1976. And yeah, there was a lot of expectations that were not set or met. So, that local knowledge, that ability to settle people, to have that intercultural, piece, especially in the markets that you're working in, like I say, Belize was very much emerging at that time. I can't thank you enough. This has been absolutely fascinating. The comments that have come through the chat box have been so overwhelmingly positive. When we press, this is one of the things that's annoying about Zoom. When I press end meeting, we won't have the chance to have a little chat afterwards because it just shuts it off when it's a webinar. So thank you so much, Anna, for putting this together, Marie, Rene, Tamlyn for being part of this. I'd love to come back to this at another time. I think it's a topic that could just really go on and on. So Anna, I'll hand to you to goodbye.
I don't really have anything else to say, Dom. Just thank you so much to my panelists for joining me and for all their time and effort in the preparation. You are all brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Dom, for facilitating. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.
Nice to be here.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.